Hola, welcome to Taco Tuesday. So happy to have all of you here. Thanks to everybody who has already joined in. The rabbinic pastor, he is a friend of mine. Nice to see you here. Thanks for joining. Tiny Love Boston, thanks for joining. I know you are a faithful follower of us and Through the Black. And Launching Lanya, hello, thank you for joining. Got my fingers crossed here. I am waiting for my brother from another mother, Redwood Bugaloo, to show up. So if you see him, say hi. I have known him for 20 years. So couple of announcements, and then we're going to get started on the topic. So I will try to make this short and sweet. Okay. Guys, I have to apologize. I'm a little sluggish today. Okay. For some reason, I could not sleep last night. You guys, I don't have any trouble sleeping. I could do it for a living. Falling asleep, it's not an issue with me, but for some reason I was just wired last night, and it wasn't caffeine and it wasn't coffee or anything like that. Honestly, you guys, I think part of it was that I just get excited for Tuesdays. I really do enjoy Taco Tuesday, but I have a lot of things that I'm going to do today that I'm kind of excited about. And so I think it was more of like an excited can't sleep, but I couldn't sleep. I was wired. And I will tell you, this is very funny. I sent a text message to Katie, our friend behind the scenes here, at, I think it was like 4:30 a.m. And within a millisecond, she had responded back. So my fellow night owl was there to give me some support. So anyway, that's my little disclaimer, guys. I think I can keep myself peppy for the next hour and a half, but I am really feeling a little lightheaded and brain foggy. So if I look a little off my game, I really am off my game, but don't spread any rumors. Everything's legal. I just didn't get any sleep last night. So as usual, everybody head on over to my Substack if you have not already. New articles go up every Monday morning. A new article went up yesterday. It is free of charge. I do not charge anybody to be on there. You can read it in the Substack app, or you can sign up for my articles to be emailed to you every Monday, whatever you prefer. But several of you have headed over there, and I so appreciate all of the people following and commenting over there. There's been some fun discussions in the comment sections over there. All right. I have another announcement to make, and I have to tell you guys, I'm a little conflicted with this one. I have absolutely never been the type of person to toot my own horn and get on my socials every 2 seconds and do screenshots of how many followers I have and all this nonsense. There's something just really sort of like insecure to me about that. But I did reach sort of a milestone today. And what I realized is this has nothing to do with me. This has to do with me thanking the people who have taken their time to not only follow me over on Instagram, but share my content and repost my content and interact with it, and all the comments and the DMs. And if you want to head over, if you're not following me on Instagram, please do. I'm Vicki Joy author, and most of the content over there is reels that are excerpts from my longer podcasts. But every once in a while, I'll throw up some personal pictures, or I'll do a live every once in a while. But just this morning, I reached 10,000 followers, which I know compared to the Tony Merkels and people out there, that is nothing, but it's certainly not anything I ever hoped to achieve. So thank you, everyone who has taken the time to sign up over there. And yeah, I'm going to continue to be posting stuff over there. And I've got a busy year, you guys. I've got 2, possibly 3 books coming out this year. Tons of travel. I have 12 trips planned between May and December as of now. And so I'm going to try to get more, you know what I've noticed, and it's hard for me kind of as an introvert. What I've noticed is the posts that get a lot of times the highest amount of views are the personal pictures, like the pictures I posted me and Dad at Silver Dollar City, or when my friend from Minnesota comes to visit me, or my cousin's coming to visit. And so I have to understand that even though I'm not always, I'm sometimes hesitant to, I don't put that stuff out there because I'm like, who cares? Like, who's interested in this? Like, I just have a wall in my brain. It's like, why do people want to see a bunch of pictures of people I'm hanging out with? Like, to me, that's like in the 80s, remember, where you'd go to your friend's house and they'd show you their home movies, and like 3 hours into it, you're like, oh my gosh, just kill me now. So I think that I have to get better acclimated to what the people want. And so I've got a lot of travel this year, so I'm hoping to do more live streams and get more pictures up there where people can see where I'm at and people I'm meeting and things like that. So go over and join me on Instagram. And to everyone who has already followed me over there, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. You made my day this morning. I was like, the last time I looked was a few days ago, and I was like hundreds and hundreds away from 10,000. And Luke Axum, who is my social media manager, he chose a podcast that for some reason the reels are doing really, really well, and they just kicked me over the edge. And I do want to thank Luke, and I also want to thank Tony Merkel, as well as Ezekiel from We Need to Talk. These guys are guys where whenever I'm on their show, I get massive bumps on my social media. So I could not have done it without Luke or Tony or Ezekiel. So thanks so much. LA, I have to mention LA too, of course. All right. So last announcement. I'm sorry I'm belaboring these announcements. Lastly, I want to talk about my Calendly.com account. And so many of you know that I have a calendar, and you can go online and you can sign up for a free one-time 40-minute freedom encounter. And these are basically designed for people who are just in a spot in life where they're isolated, they're alone, they're traumatized, they're hurting, they're broken, they're going through grief, they're going through a crisis of faith or a dark night of the soul, all the way to experiencing sleep paralysis, paranormal activity, night terrors, demonic oppression, spiritual warfare. And we meet and we preach the gospel to each other, and we pray with you, and et cetera, et cetera. So as of right now, the calendar is booked solid through the end of April. So there's nothing available as of now. And you may notice, if some of you have gone on there, that the calendar is somewhat offline. If you go into May through December, it says no appointments available. That's because the calendar has been temporarily taken down, but there's good news. The reason it's been taken down is because I can no longer personally meet the demand of all of the people that need this kind of support. And so this is a good thing. So I now have collected a team. So far, there are 7 of us, and it's a wonderful team. I'm even thinking about, I'm hoping to maybe even do a video where I can bring all 7 team members on individually and introduce you to them, and they can let you know who they are and what their qualifications are and what led them into this kind of ministry, so that you feel like you have a little bit of an introduction before you sign up for a call. But with that said, I am trying behind the scenes now to coordinate everyone's schedule, how many calls a week they want to do, what times are available. We're all in different time zones. We've got pretty much every time zone. And we're going to, my goal is to have the calendar back up by May 1st so people can start signing up for May. So the good news in all of this is there's going to be a few more freedom encounters every month than there were before, because I have a team helping me. But what everyone needs to understand, and this is what I need to start hitting home, and I'm going to put this lingo on the calendar as well as on my website. But what this means is that when you sign up, you're not necessarily going to get Vicki Joy on the Zoom call, but you're going to get qualified people that I recommend, very good friends of mine. Everyone on the team thus far is someone who I personally know, who I've known for years. And I've been praying. I have a prayer team behind the scenes who's been praying for over a year that a prayer team would form and get together. And so I believe that the Holy Spirit has chosen these people. And so they are very qualified, and all of them feel a strong calling into this type of ministry. Their heart is in it, and they're very compassionate, qualified people. So more on that as it unfolds. I will let everyone know when it is back up and running. So with that said, we're done with the announcements. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. I'm going to take a sip of my Bucky water. All right. So as the thumbnail suggested, we're going to talk about the Mount of Olives today. And I really had to rein it in, guys, because the Mount of Olives, I'll tell you, you know how some stories, there are things in the story that aren't people, that like transcend, like they almost like become a character, even though they're not a human. Like I'm thinking right now of like Lord of the Rings, like the ring is actually like a character because it becomes so looming in the overall story. The Mount of Olives is like that in the Bible, all throughout the Old and New Testament. And of course, we know that mountains are representative of thrones, spiritual thrones. And we know like Mount Hermon, that the 200 watchers came down. And we know that Moses, when he went up Mount Moriah, I believe it was, interacted with Jehovah. And so some pretty strange, supernatural, I know a lot of people don't like that word, but let's just say some mind-blowing things happened when human beings climbed these various mountains. And so the Mount of Olives is a character in and of itself in the Bible. It just shows up with King David, with Jesus, with the disciples. It's an amazing thing. I'm always saying that we're not going to truly understand what the scriptures say if we become divorced from the culture, context, history, language, and geography of the text. And the Mount of Olives is definitely one of those geographical locations that has some high strangeness to it. So I had to truncate this as small as possible. There were so many rabbit trails I wanted to go off on, but I'm going to try to just keep it selected down to just the times where it looks like there is some travel going on between the terrestrial and the celestial realm. Now, with that said, I have to preface, I always say this, guys, when I get on here, I'm not teaching, I'm not lecturing. This is just a conversation with other believers. I'm just saying like, hey, this is some stuff I've been musing, some stuff I've been reading over. None of this is dogma. I'm not writing a PhD dissertation on it. This is just stuff that have come across my reading that I find very fascinating. And so I'm sharing it with other people in hopes that other people will say, oh, that's really interesting. I never saw that before. So try not to take everything I say too seriously. And I always appreciate the grace I get from you guys. I really feel like in the comment section, I do not get beat up half as much as I think I should be getting beat up. So I appreciate your grace. But the second thing too is to just understand that this topic is, I'm kind of losing my thought, guys. Again, the brain fog that I warned you about. So if I think about it, there was something else that I was going to say basically about this this topic of it's right there. I can sort of almost pull it out, but not quite. So it must not have been that important. But anyway, all of that to say, we're going to get started with a little discussion on the Mount of Olives. Okay, it just came back to me. The brain is such a funny thing, guys, isn't it? Oh my gosh. What I was going to say, did I just lose it again? Is yes, the point of these live streams is not to give everybody, a certificate in theology. It is to pique your interest. It's to give a very high level overview of a particular topic so that if it piques your interest, you then have some resources and you have a launching pad to say, I'm going to study that. That's really cool. I'm going to go and I'm going to research this stuff. So not only are you being a good Berean and you're checking everything that I'm saying, but this is just a springboard. And so that was something I just wanted everyone to know. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a pastor. I am just a born again believer who loves Jesus and gets super excited when I read the word and I find nuggets in it. And I just want to share the nuggets. And sometimes are the nuggets look like coal that might turn into diamonds, and sometimes it's just dirty black rocks. So let's see what we got. No further ado. All right. So the Mount of Olives. This is a quote from Zev Porat from his book, Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit. And we're going to be talking a lot about that book today. The Mount of Olives, a specific location in Jerusalem, is central to understanding what God's been up to since the garden fall. It is biblically, historically, and archaeologically connected to that seemingly enigmatic Golgotha better than any other place in Jerusalem. That place is the Mount of Olives. Now, a word here, guys, about Zev Porat, because I am going to be talking in some of these sections extensively about his book, specifically Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit. Because for those of you who do not know Zev Porat, Zev is he is a rabbi, born and raised, still living in Israel. Hebrew is his first language. He is messianic. He believes that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. He is very good friends with Pastor Carl Gallups, which many of you are familiar with. And he is from a very long line of very, very educated Orthodox Jewish religious leaders. I can't remember the sect. It might have been Sanhedrin. But he went and got all of the credentials, and he was going to go into, the family business. And at some point he got hit by a Mack truck and realized that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. And he lost just about everything for making that decision. There are family members he has not seen in years. He gave up something like I don't want to quote because I don't remember, but a multi-million-dollar inheritance, because the stipulation in the will was you can't receive the money unless you deny Jesus Christ, and he refused to do it. So very intelligent guy. And so as I'm quoting Zev, I want you to understand that this is his first language is Hebrew. He studied the scriptures his entire life, and he sees it from a Hebraic perspective. He understands the culture, the context, the history, the language, and the geography, which is really what we're primarily focusing on today with Mount of Olives. So, all right, the Mount of Olives is a place of temptation resisted, a site of betrayal and endurance, a location of angelic activity, and a prophetic battlefield of the Lord. In biblical theology, it's one of the clearest geographic hotspots of spiritual warfare. Wow. All right, another quote from Zev. It would appear in many ways that the Mount of Olives is probably the most specific place on the planet that is the literal epicenter of demonic warfare. There's a reason for this. Just ponder that for a second, guys. That blows me away. As someone who spends most of her life researching and studying spiritual warfare, the Mount of Olives is probably the most specific place on the planet that is the literal epicenter of demonic warfare. That is a packed statement. You think of all of the places, what about Mount Hermon? What about Pan's Grotto? Wow. Okay. All right. That quote just blows me away, if you can't tell. All right. So first thing we're going to study. Oh, by the way, guys, not that it matters, and this is my retentiveness coming out. The few things that I'm going to mention that happened on the Mount of Olives, I've put it in chronological order. In my westernized, stoic, Greek, compartmentalized, linear thinking. So all of this is in the order that they occurred in the New Testament. All right. So Ezekiel's vision by the river Kibar, and obviously this is Old Testament. All right. This is Ezekiel 1. It's probably written around 593 BCE, or so we're told. And also quoting from Ezekiel 11, 22 through 25. So we're all familiar with this story, right? So the cherubim lifted up their wings with the wheels beside them, and the glory of the God of Israel was high above them. And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain, which is on the east side of the city. Then the Spirit took me, which is Ezekiel, up and brought me in a vision by the Spirit of God into Chaldea, to those in captivity, and the vision that I seen went up from me, that I had seen went up from me. So I spoke to those in captivity of all the things the Lord had shown me. All right, so basically you can't tell it from the way I have excerpted this out of context, but basically we know from Ezekiel chapter 1 that Ezekiel is in Babylon, and he is by the river Kibar. And so he's not in Israel. He's at the river Kibar, and he's taken up in the Spirit, and he's shown all these things. And at some point, and we see this in Ezekiel 8, this is when he is shown all of the abominations happening within and underneath and on the steps of the temple, and all of the occult worship that's going on, and the women weeping for Tammuz, and all of the satanic rituals going on underneath the temple. And then he is transported back to the river Kibar, and he explains to all the people in Babylon and the high priests and things what had just happened and what he just saw. So he's in Babylon, he's in Jerusalem, he's back in Babylon. All right, so the mountain, verse 23. So in verse 23 of this Ezekiel passage, when he's leaving Jerusalem and he's transported back to the river Kibar, in verse 23 it says that the point that he leaves Jerusalem is on a mountain which is on the east side of the city. The city is Jerusalem. So here's verse 23. Ezekiel 11:23 describes the departure of God's glory from Jerusalem, stating it rose up from within the city and stood over the mountain east of the city. This mountain is explicitly identified as the Mount of Olives in the biblical context and commentary. And guys, even as I'm reading this here, I might have some of my slides out of order. This we're going to talk about a little bit later too. I think I'm getting these two things mixed up. One is Ezekiel going back and forth from Kibar to Jerusalem, back to Kibar. And then also in the book of Ezekiel is when the glory of God departs the temple. Now, even though I have my slides mixed up and in the wrong order, what's similar in both of these, and it's still in chronological order, the river Kibar incident happens, and then later in the chapter, the glory of God departs from the temple. But in both cases, whether it is Ezekiel traveling from the river Kibar to Jerusalem, back to the river Kibar in Babylon, or it is the glory of God departing on the temple, you will find that the transitions are happening on the mountain east of the city, which is the Mount of Olives. So we have two pretty spectacular events in the book of Ezekiel, both culminating on this same mountain. All right. The Mount of Olives is located in East Jerusalem, a mountain ridge east of the Old City with an elevation of about 818 meters, which is just under 2,700 feet above sea level. The river Kibar is a canal near the ancient city of Babylon in modern-day Iraq. It is historically significant as the location where the prophet Ezekiel had his vision during the Babylonian exile. The Mount of Olives in Jerusalem and the river Kibar in ancient Babylon are approximately 620 miles apart. So just giving you the idea that if you're saying like, well, he was probably sleepwalking or something, it was a long journey. All right. So we've already touched on this a little bit because I had a slide out of order. That's fine. The glory of God departs the temple. This is also in the book of Ezekiel. This is in Ezekiel chapters 10 and 11. The glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the temple in Jerusalem. That was verse 18. I think we're in chapter 10. From there, it stood over the cherubim. And then the cherubim, with the glory of the Lord, lifted up from the earth in Ezekiel's sight. And it moved to the east gate of the Lord's house with the glory of the God of Israel above them. And Ezekiel 11:22, the last we see of the glory of God as the cherubim is extricating it from the temple. The glory of God went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain, which is on the east of the city. So it doesn't explicitly say in the text that it got sucked up into the sky or it disappeared. It leaves us there. But we know that the glory of God departed from the temple and departed from Israel. And we know that it had, why didn't it? This is what's fascinating, guys. God can do whatever he wants, right? So if the glory within the Ark of the Covenant is departing and these cherubim are coming to escort it to heaven, Jesus walked through walls after the resurrection. Like, why couldn't it just have ascended right there from the ark and up into the sky and been done with it? Why is it traveling all the way east and landing on the top of the Mount of Olives before it departs? Like, this is a detail that is just should be very fascinating to us. Oh, all right. In addition to the Bible, so take this with a grain of salt, but there are extra biblical sources and traditions that also talk about the departing of the glory of God from the temple. In the Talmud, especially Rosh Hashanah 31a, it describes God's presence leaving the temple. It pauses in stages and finally rests on the Mount of Olives before disappearing from sight. So that part agrees with what we see in Ezekiel 11. All right, this is huge conceptually because the Mount of Olives becomes a last contact point between heaven and earth and a kind of departure threshold portal between the terrestrial and celestial realms. All right, here's some extra biblical traditions. So again, take it with a grain of salt. Eusebius of Caesarea described the Mount of Olives as sacred due to it being the location of the ascension. Cyril of Jerusalem speaks of the Mount of Olives in catechetical teachings as a place tied to Christ's heavenly movement. And there are even some Islamic traditions, the Isra and the Miraj. Muhammad is taken from Mecca to Jerusalem and then ascends to heaven. Now, in all fairness, this ascent is tied to the Temple Mount, but some later traditions and commentators connect the surrounding ridges, including the Mount of Olives, to the event's geography. So again, take it with a grain of salt. All right, on to the next event. Angels appear to Jesus in Gethsemane. Well, you're like, well, that's a garden. What does that have to do with what we're talking about? Gethsemane is at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Again, this is why geography matters, guys. So Jesus is about to be crucified. Luke 22:40. Okay, what I'm doing here, guys, before I read this is I'm trying to prove the point that we read early on when Zev Porat said that the Mount of Olives is like the pinnacle, like the epicenter of spiritual and demonic warfare. So here's Jesus in Gethsemane with his disciples, and they're at the foot of the Mount of Olives. So they haven't ascended it, but they are right there with it as a backdrop. Jesus says, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." Now, that's interesting. Jesus is about to be crucified. The disciples have no idea what's going on. Not really. They don't know. They don't really know what's going on. Jesus could have said, "Pray for discernment. Pray for wisdom. Pray for courage. Pray for fortitude. Pray that your faith will not waver in the next 24 to 48 hours. Pray for strength. Pray that you can stay awake. Pray. There's a million things he could have prayed. Pray for me. Pray that I'm strengthened. But Jesus brings them to the foot of the Mount of Olives, and he says, pray that you don't fall into temptation. As if Jesus knew that there was a thin veil there in the location where they were. And it's very interesting to me that of all the things he could have said, he's praying and warning the disciples to be sober-minded and vigilant and to guard against temptation. Mark 14:34, Jesus experiences despair to the point of death. I don't know if any of you guys have experienced this. I think it's somewhat common, especially for Christians. We all sort of understand the categories of depression. We sometimes when we have that oppressive feeling, we're like, I haven't eaten, I haven't slept. This is my fault. I'm going to feel a lot better if I just eat something or have a cup of coffee. Then there's the depression that comes with, it makes sense that I'm depressed. My best friend just died. My husband's leaving me. I just lost my child. Like that's more of like a grief-based depression. But I'm sure you've all experienced it. There are those times where it's almost like a bipolar moment where you're about your day and everything's great. You're in a pretty good mood and the sun is shining and everything's under control. And then just bam, it just hits you. And it's this like paralyzing hopelessness, this paralyzing despair. And that's usually when most of us go, that's the enemy, because that came on way too fast. Like that's not me needing, a hamburger. And so it's interesting too. Here we are, geographically located at the base of the epicenter of demonic warfare. And Jesus had every right to be negatively, emotionally impacted. He knew what was about to happen. And that's all we as moderns read into the text. Of course, a despair fell over him. He's about to be crucified. He's about to be betrayed by friends. Like, who wouldn't? But maybe there's something more going on as well. Because as this despair to the point of death comes upon him, an angel from heaven appears to him, strengthening him. Now, we sort of have this idea, probably from all the movies we've seen, that angels just disappear, appear right in front of our eyes and disappear right in front of our eyes. And they can just sort of, kind of like in the old Star Trek movies, they can get under those little like round lights and disintegrate and reappear somewhere else. I'm not enough of a Trekkie to know what that thing is called. Trekkies, let us know in the live chat. But it seems like maybe the reason why Jesus chose that location for praying in his greatest hour is vicinity. Because if the angels have to use a particular portal in order to travel from the celestial to the terrestrial realm, Jesus would want to be right there in their immediate vicinity. Guys, I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs of angelic travel and what they can do and what they can't do. But what's interesting to me is here they are in Gethsemane, and the disciples are potentially going to fall under temptation, which Peter later does several times by cutting off the ear and denying Jesus 3 times. And then we have Jesus all of a sudden having this despair to the point of death. And then we have an angel showing up. And so we have maybe Satan himself and angels there in this location. And could it have something to do with vicinity? Is it that Jesus positioned himself in a location closest to where those things could come and go? I'm just speculating, guys. I wasn't there. All right. Next topic. Jesus is crucified. Okay, now is where we're going to get a little controversial, guys. Now's where we kind of go against all the official narratives, right? And I'm just going to say this now. In 1994, I went to Israel on a trip, and it through with my church group. It was a big church group, and my mom and dad were with, and my dad's parents were still alive, so my grandma and my grandpa were there as well. And it was wonderful, and I took a zillion pictures, and it was a life-changing event. And I will tell you that some of the touristy traps that I was taken to as a young, I was probably, oh my goodness, in 1994. I was probably like 21, I guess. Uh, Young, impressionable, denominational, evangelical, not red pilled yet, youngin. There were places that they took us, and I was very, very moved, and I got very, very emotional, and it was very beautiful. And it's an amazing experience walking in this place that you've read about your whole life. And so I just want you to know that as we start talking about some of this stuff, I'm not decrying Israel or some of the touristy places. If you've been there and you've taken pictures and you had moments with Jesus in those spots, I'm not trying to take that away from you. Jesus can meet you wherever he wants. But it doesn't necessarily mean that those were really the locations where certain things happened. All right, let me get my PowerPoint back up. All right. Jesus is crucified on Golgotha. We also know Golgotha as Hill of the Skull or Calvary. Now, Skull Hill is in present-day Israel. I've seen it. I was pretty impressed by it at 21 years old. That rock looks like a big skull. It's also known as Gordon's Calvary or Garden Tomb Hill, because the Garden Tomb is very close to Skull Hill. It's a rocky outcrop located just north of the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem's Old City. And we're going to have a picture of that in a sec. And I will tell you, it was a little anticlimactic because you saw this like big, rock that looked like a skull, and right beneath it was a parking lot, and it was like a bus company. I don't know if it still is, but it was just all these huge like buses lined up, and it was like, you're ruining my picture. You're ruining my mental image, you guys. This is crazy. So Zev Porat has a different idea of where Jesus may have been crucified. But this is Skull Hill. If you go to Israel, they will take you here and tell you that this is where Jesus was crucified. And so you'll see right here that, okay, that, yeah, that kind of looks like a skull, right? Okay. Now, we're going to jump to Hebrews. And this might seem a little disjointed, but this is very crucial. And I should point out now, guys, I'm getting a lot of this information from the stuff about the crucifixion. Some of the crucifixion burial stuff came from Zev's book, Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit. And section 10, there's a whole section on the Mount of Olives, not just on whether he died there or was buried there, but just it goes into like Samuel and King David, and meaning the book of Samuel and King David. I could not possibly summarize the wealth of information that is in that book. There are other things not related to this topic. He gives an in-depth geographical insight into where in Bethlehem Jesus was born and what that stable was, and who those shepherds were, and the vicinity of Bethlehem to Jerusalem, and how that geography has changed in modernity. And I will tell you, if anyone thinks that geography of Israel isn't important to understand the text, I will tell you that when I read his chapters on where in Bethlehem Jesus was born and the significance of what that stable was and the significance of the particular types of shepherds that showed up, just in that little geography lesson, I was weeping. It absolutely blew apart all of my little nativity scene, little kid ideas. It added 50 more facets to the diamond. It was absolutely amazing. So little caveat, but Zev Porat's book, Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit, was absolutely amazing. So when we go into Hebrews, I'm getting this from Zev. He's building the argument. The author of Hebrews writes, "We have an altar from which those who minister at the tabernacle have no right to eat. The high priest carries the blood of animals into the most holy place as a sin offering, but the bodies are burned outside the camp. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore." All right, so the altar. We have an altar from which those who minister at the tabernacle have no right to eat. So Zev tells us that this altar is the ancient Mikvah altar on the Mount of Olives. This altar wasn't the one in the temple. We assume as modern readers, when you see the word altar, that we're talking about the temple. This is something I don't know. This is something I culturally did not know. There was an altar in the temple, and there was a second altar, this ancient Mikvah altar on the Mount of Olives. All right. In 2 Samuel 24:9 and 1 Chronicles 21:5, the census ordered by King David, Mikvah, has etymological reference to counting, specifically for the counting of heads or skulls, meaning all of the bodies of the sacrificial animals, right? Is this perhaps yet another reference to Golgotha as the skull place? So in other words, Hill of the Skull, we all have heard the Golgotha story, that Goliath of Gath, Golgotha, that David, after he killed Goliath and beheaded him, he went up into a hill and buried Goliath's head. So the Hill of the Skull was this hill where Goliath's head was buried. Now, what's interesting about that is that at the time that David killed Goliath, Israel did not occupy Jerusalem. It was still occupied by the Jebusites. So it would seem strange that he would go into Jebusite territory and bury the skull on that hill. But anyway, I digress. I think we talk about that a little bit later too. Okay, and so what Zev is saying is that there's an altar, and that the very etymology of this word mikvah means counting the heads. So here all of these lambs are being sacrificed on this altar on the Mount of Olives. And so that also could be the Hill of the Skull, because it's where all of the skulls or the heads were counted after the sacrifices. All right, in Nehemiah 3:31, the Mikvah gate is rendered the inspection gate. 1 Samuel 17:54 tells us that David took Goliath's head to Jerusalem. And like I just said, but at that time, Jerusalem was still Jebusite territory. All right. So the ritual and city gate, the ritual. So I'm going through Hebrews kind of one line at a time. And so if we go back, it talks in here about, I'm not finding it right away. I don't want to get hung up trying to find it. So, all right, the ritual and the city gate. So Zev tells us that the ritual is the sacrifice of the red heifer, and the city gate is the eastern gate, the one through which Jesus entered Jerusalem the last week of his life. And in coming into the city through that gate, he had just come from the Mount of Olives. The Golden Gate, as it is sometimes referred to in Christian writing, is the only eastern gate of the Temple Mount. It is one of only two gates that used to offer access into the city from that side in Jesus's day. It has been walled up since medieval times. And those of you who've been to Israel have seen that walled up eastern gate. And if that doesn't give you chills, I don't know what will. All right. So because I can't go into the exorbitant detail that Zev goes through in his book, here are some additional resources. So you can take a screenshot or take a picture if you want. Obviously, you're going to find a lot of this information, especially in section 10 of Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit by Zev. He also researched Ernest L. Martin's book, Secrets of Golgotha. And he also researched the works of Dr. James Tabor, Dr. Douglas Jacobi, Dr. Nikos Kokinos, Dr. N.F. Hutchinson, and Dr. Helmut Heinrich Koester. So I'll leave that up for 1 second in case people want to jot that down. And just to clarify, these are all people that wrote about this concept that Golgotha, the hill of the skull, was the Mount of Olives. All right, now let's talk about Jesus's burial. If you go to Israel, these are the two traditional locations that they're going to bring you to. I like to refer to this as the Protestant and the Catholic location. So obviously, one or both of them is wrong, right? Jesus wasn't buried in two different places. So on the left, you have the garden tomb, or Gordon's garden tomb. And on the right, you have I believe it's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And okay, this doesn't hold water at all, okay? Because I don't think emotions and feelings necessarily, they can be part of the evidence, but they can't be the only evidence. But I will tell you that as a 21-year-old in Israel, when I went to the garden tomb, I was very, very moved. It was quiet and it was beautiful and it was clean and there were flowers all over. And it's owned by, well, at the time it was owned by Christians there in Jerusalem. And so just by the very nature that Christians owned it would give it, I think, that sense of the Holy Spirit's here, because it's a place in this war-torn land where there's people that know the truth and know that Jesus is the Messiah. So was the peace and the emotion that I felt there evidence this is where he was buried? Or was I just going off of the blessing of the land that these are people that believe that Jesus is the Messiah in this hotbed of people that don't believe it? And so, of course, I'm going to feel the Holy Spirit there. I don't know. But I felt a deep, real emotion at that place. On the other hand, when we went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I was creeped out. You go inside this basically cave. It was dark, and I got out of there as soon as I could. So again, that doesn't hold water. How Vicki feels when she's in certain places doesn't make biblical truth. But I'm just telling you that as a 21-year-old, that was my experience in both places. And so I did what most people do, because this place made me feel good and this place creeped me out. This must be the real place. But plan C is, and neither one of them might be the place. Like, how do I know, right? So anyway, a slight caveat there. But anyone who has been to Israel and been to the Garden Tomb would probably agree with me that it's just a beautiful place. All right, so there you've got Garden Tomb on the left, Church of the Holy Sepulchre on the right. Okay, Jesus is buried. Okay, again, quoting Zev again. Zev believes that Jesus was buried on the Mount of Olives. Now, this argument is a minority view, but he builds it up by combining geography, typology, prophetic symbolism, and I would add personal memory, because I don't think I put anything in the PowerPoint about this, but as a child, all throughout his life, he would be up on the Mount of Olives, and he saw the change in terrain over the course of the decades. You know how you grow up somewhere, and then all of a sudden they put up a Walmart, and then they put up this and they put up that, and all of a sudden this rural area is just filled. And if you move away from a place and you come back later, you're like, well, you don't even recognize where you're at. Zev had the advantage of vicinity where he grew up, going to the Mount of Olives all through childhood and all through adolescence and growing up. So he saw things, 50, 60, 70 years ago. I don't know how old he is, so if he's not 70 yet, I apologize. But he saw things with his own eyes as a child that are no longer there. Okay, so he has that advantage as well. All right, I will briefly summarize 8 of Zev's main points. But again, I strongly recommend you read the book for a cohesive, in context argument. This is high level summary of his main points. Okay. All right. But there is one thing I want to tell you that kind of fits into what I was just telling you about his childhood. When Zev was a kid, there was a massive stone on the top of the Mount of Olives. And it's no longer there. It was taken away. And I can't remember if it was corroding and they were worried about injury or it rolling down, or I can't remember the detail, but there used to be a massive stone on the top of the Mount of Olives. It's no longer there. And I also, because this is just something that culturally we don't understand as Westerners, the Mount of Olives has been used as a burial ground for thousands of years. So this idea, whether or not Jesus was buried up there, we don't know, but it did act as a cemetery for thousands of years. It was where people went and got buried. And the theory was that the closer you were to God, the quicker you would get raised up into heaven, right? And this is why, if you've ever been to Israel, a lot of the graves are above ground, and they're not getting cremated. They're like, I want to be fully intact and above ground, high up in the air. I want, when the Messiah comes, bam, I want front row seats, right? So not at all unusual to have a graveyard on a mountain in these cultures. All right. These are the 8 points that I'm high level summarizing from Zev's book. Okay. So these are his arguments as to why he believes that Jesus Christ was buried, that his tomb was on the Mount of Olives. All right, the garden tomb location reconsidered. The Gospels say Jesus was buried in a garden near the crucifixion site. Porat argues the traditional site, Church of the Holy Sepulchre or the garden tomb, may be incorrect. He proposes the Mount of Olives area, especially near Gethsemane, better fits a garden setting with tombs. Number 2, connections to Gethsemane. Gethsemane was an olive press. Guys, I don't know if you've ever heard, I wish I could remember the name of the guy. I heard a sermon once, and a guy was in an olive press. It was like an underground olive press. And he was citing all of the similarities between the process of pressing an olive to get oil out of it for perfect pure oil and the crushing of the Son of Man. And so when you understand, again, when we don't have the culture or the context, and we're in this urbanized modern culture, and we don't understand the agrarian past of the Semitic people, we miss so much. And so when you see the incredibly beautiful, spine-chilling similarities where Jesus is actually metaphorically being compared to an olive being crushed in a press, the idea that Jesus would be crucified and buried in an area where there were olive trees and there were olive presses starts to culturally, contextually, and geographically make a lot more sense. Okay. Jesus agonizes and submits to the Father in Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives. Actually, not on it. As we learned earlier, it's at the foot of the Mount of Olives. So Porat sees this as spiritually significant. Gethsemane equals oil press. Jesus is pressed in suffering before death. Porat argues that it's fitting that Jesus prays, suffers, is arrested, and possibly buried in the same sacred zone. All right, number 3, the red heifer and temple ritual typology. In Numbers 19, the red heifer is sacrificed outside the camp on the east side of Jerusalem. Jewish tradition places this ritual on or near the Mount of Olives. Porat connects this to Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate purification sacrifice. Therefore, his death and burial should align with that same eastern location. Number 4, the East Gate. The East Gate of Jerusalem faces the Mount of Olives. In Ezekiel 43 and 44, chapters that is, the glory of God leaves the temple and returns through the East Gate. Porat argues that Jesus, the glory of God, departs and returns in this same region. So you understand what we're saying? The glory of God, the pre-incarnate Messiah, Jehovah, departed the temple, and his exit point was the Mount of Olives. And Porat is now saying, when the glory of God returns, he's going to set his feet down on the Mount of Olives. He's going to show up the same place he departed. So burial on the Mount of Olives aligns with this eastward messianic movement. All right, number 5, the glory of God pattern, the Ezekiel parallel. In Ezekiel, God's presence leaves the temple, stops on the Mount of Olives. Porat connects this with Jesus. Jesus teaches, weeps, prays, and ascends from the Mount of Olives. Therefore, it is a central divine transition point. He suggests burial there fits this theological pattern of departure and return. I want to say a word here about where it says that Jesus weeps on the Mount of Olives. This is really fascinating. We all know the story where Jesus weeps over Jerusalem and he wants to gather them like chicks. He is on or at the base of, he's basically in the area of the Mount of Olives as he's doing that. Now, somewhere, I don't have the scripture reference, somewhere in first or 2nd Samuel, it tells a story where David is weeping over Jerusalem, and his people with him are all weeping with him, and he's ascending up the Mount of Olives as he's doing this. And so here we have David in the Old Testament ascending the Mount of Olives, weeping during this war exploit. And then centuries and centuries and centuries later, we have Jesus going up the same ascent as King David, weeping over Jerusalem. The parallelism in Hebraic thought is, as a writer and as a poet, it just, the symmetry in scripture, just, it's so beautiful. It's so perfect. All right, number 6, first fruits, resurrection typology. The Mount of Olives is associated with resurrection hope in Jewish tradition and future resurrection of the dead. Porat ties this to Jesus as the first fruits of resurrection. Thus, burial on the Mount of Olives would symbolically align with resurrection theology. Proximity to the crucifixion. He challenges, he is Zev Porat. He challenges the traditional placement of Golgotha. Porat suggests crucifixion may have occurred closer to the eastern side of Jerusalem, which would naturally place the tomb nearby on the Mount of Olives. Last one, number 8, priestly sacrificial imagery. The Mount of Olives was associated with priestly activity, ashes of sacrifice, the red heifer again. Porat sees Jesus as both priest and sacrifice. Therefore, burial in this region fits a temple sacrifice framework. All right, so summary. The Mount of Olives is the theological axis of departure, sacrifice, purification, and return. So it makes sense that Jesus' burial happened there, not at the traditional Western site. This view is not accepted by mainstream scholarship or tourism industries. Most historians place Jesus' burial at or near the two tourist traps, Garden Tomb, Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And then I say this a little tongue-in-cheek, are these the same historians who tell us that the Wailing Wall is part of Solomon's temple when it's really the ruins of the Roman fort of Antonia? Porat's argument is typological and theological, not primarily archaeological, which they're saying is a weakness. But guys, I don't care what historians say. When we put together all of the pieces of the prophecies, they might not lead to the same places that we are told. All right. There are more occurrences. Angels appear to the women at the tomb. Angels appear to women at the tomb. If Porat's theories are correct and Jesus was indeed buried on the Mount of Olives, we now have another appearance of angels descended from the heavenly realm to the terrestrial realm at this same exact axis point. There are the angels once again on the top of the Mount of Olives. All right, some of these we're going to breeze through because they're self-explanatory. All right, Jesus raises from the dead. Again, if Jesus was indeed buried in a tomb on the Mount of Olives, when he rose on the third day, he would be right there at the axis point. But Jesus did not immediately ascend to his Father. This happened 40 days later. However, Jesus had been in Tartarus for 3 days. So it's interesting to muse, this is just Vicki theorizing, that if the Mount of Olives is a liminal space or some kind of portal between planes, that this burial location would be ideal for traversing between the terrestrial realm and Sheol, which was another plane. All right, Jesus's ascension. 40 days after the resurrection, we read about this in Acts chapter 1. After Jesus said this, he was taken up before their eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go up into heaven. Then they returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day walk from the city. So that's verse 12. So we find out at the very end of that passage in verse 12, if they return to Jerusalem from the hill called Mount of Olives, that means that this event where Jesus is taken up into heaven and the angels say, what are you looking at? They were on the Mount of Olives. All right. Angels appear to the disciples. Now, interestingly, this happens immediately after the ascension. So Jesus has been on earth for 40 days. He's ascended into heaven. And now the angels appear to the disciples. And when he said these things, they were looking on as he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven, as he went, behold, 2 men stood by them in white robes and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven. So we are given this location as the Mount of Olives. So again, they're on the Mount of Olives. Jesus is ascended into heaven, and now all of a sudden, 2 angels are, bam, right there in their proximity. And could this be that the angels came down through the same method of transportation that Jesus just went up? All right, Jesus' second coming. Zechariah 14, 1 through 5. And in that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in 2 from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it to the south, half of it toward the south. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you. So here it all culminates once again on the Mount of Olives. So it's interesting, and I kind of like the conciseness and the the parallelism. I mean, we've never thought in these terms before as Westerners, but to think that Jesus could have died, been buried, raised, and returned all in the same place. Like, that's organized. That's cool. That's consistent. I love that. And again, God can do whatever he wants. And, he can return in New York City if he wants, I mean, we know biblically he's not going to, but what I'm saying is it's his prerogative, right? And again, I'm quoting mainly from Zev's book in this research, because when I read it, I was just blown away by it. For me, guys, I know everybody doesn't think the same way, and we don't all draw near to God in the same way. But for me, I love having my paradigms blown to smithereens. And I'm not going to say it's always easy. There's been some difficult ones, believe me. But when I just have the same Sunday school picture in my mind every time I hear a story, because the first time I heard these stories, I was a little girl. And so when I, for decades and decades, just keep getting the same picture in my head, pictures that were formed by a 5, 6, 7-year-old. When someone can come in and add layers of linguistics and location and geography and culture and context and language and all this stuff, and turn that little still shot cartoon image I have in my head into this living, breathing, 3-dimensional diorama, it blows my mind when I can see things in a deeper way. And so I tend to not get too threatened when people believe other things that I do. If it's a salvation issue, then I might get ruffled because it matters. But all this to say, guys, what I'm saying here is I'm not married to any of this. If Jesus died on Skull Hill in Israel over the bus station, and if he was buried in the garden tomb, or if he was buried in the Holy Sepulchre, it does not matter to me. None of this matters. I know he came. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I know that he died. I know he loves me. I know he loves his children. I know he rose from the dead. I know he has the keys to sin and death, sin and Hades. I know he's coming back. That's really where the rubber meets the road. That's what matters. And all these other little details, it's not so much that they matter to the point where we should all be arguing over them, but where they're beneficial to me is it gives me a greater picture of just how awesome this whole entire redemptive story is. And it draws me nearer to him when I can better envision who he was, where he was, what his surroundings looked like, what the topography was, what his people were like, what his language were like. It just adds a more defined picture in my head than the little primary school pictures that I got in the beginning. All right, everybody. Let me just quick check the time here. I don't know. Oh, it's early. So Katie, I don't know if you're still there. I forgot to mention at the beginning in my prolonged announcements that if anyone had questions or comments, to put it in all caps so we could throw it up there. I do think that she has some stuff saved. Yeah. Okay. Jay Barry, so glad to catch a live again. Question for chat or VJA. Is the Mount of Olives also considered the Mount of the Congregation or Mount of the Moedim? That I do not know. You've stumped me. I suppose I could look that up real quick. Katie, maybe I'll have you look that up real quick while we put up the next question. Good question, Jay Barry. Thank you. I do not know that. I might learn something today. All right. So Katie, I don't know if there's any other comments or questions. I'm just going to kind of quickly scroll through the comments myself too. My eyes are really bad today, guys. When I'm tired, I can't see a thing. Chris cracking jokes. Okay, Redwood Bugaloo, I see your hello. Hi, everybody. Redwood Bugaloo and I, we go back 20 years. Hi, Colleen. Nice to see you. You're always so faithful. Jason Windsor, my friend and brother. Nice to see you in here. Kay Beth, as always. A Cherokee hippie. Hey. All right. It's so good to see you guys. I can't even believe I can even read half of this stuff. I got this big, huge monitor that I thought was going to like solve all my problems. And I can't even get the stupid thing set up. Oh, I need help, guys. All right. Zuni315. Hello. Just scrolling through. I'm sure this is not very fun to be watching, guys, but I'm just scrolling here to just say hi to everybody. Bo Diamond. Hi, Vicki. Oh, good. I'm glad the time works for you. Okay. Tiny loves Boston. I always love to see you here. Okay. All right, ladies and gents. It looks like we don't have any questions or whatever. Jay Barry, I'm going to look that question up. I'm going to stick it in the comments. I'll pin it in the comments. Okay. But thank you for asking that. I love the theological questions because if I know it, great. But if I don't, then I learned something. So there you go. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining, especially for those of you that came live. And I love seeing the chat kind of going as I'm talking. I love to see you guys fellowshipping. And thanks to everyone who's watching in the archives and liking and sharing and subscribing and putting comments. Always so appreciative of you. Remember Substack and Instagram. Come find me on those other forums. But that is it for today. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you next Tuesday.